Hey everybody, it's MotherGoose27 and welcome back to my channel. Today, we are talking about a podcast which I recently figured out about, but I I can't watch a podcast. Well, some, I guess they do have a video places where you can watch it.
We're falling apart here. Pull it together.
I've been listening to podcasts a lot more often ever since I started my own podcast. But I found the McElroy brothers, and I've been listening to a lot of their podcast stuff. They are just fantastic. I've loved all of their podcasts that I've listened to so far, but then I found out about a D&D podcast, and I was like, I should try that out. So I finally listened to The Adventure Zone. Balance. Like always, there's going to be time codes in the description below. If you want to jump around, I'm going to give a spoiler-free, just kind of like general thoughts, summary section, and then I'm going to have a spoiler review where I talk about some more of the in-depth things that actually happened and how it makes me feel, and then I will give my final thoughts and we'll end it. So let's get started. So The Adventure Zone is a D&D, well, it's not even D&D. It was just D&D when it first started, but as they started doing other stories, they started playing other games as well, and they're exploring how they can like tell stories in this way, and I really like that. But Balance is the only one I've really listened to so far. I've started the first episode of Commitment, but I'm only like halfway through it. But I'm really excited to listen to the rest. But today we're talking specifically about Balance, which is a D&D podcast. It features the McElroy brothers and their father, Clint McElroy, and they're just playing D&D, and it's something I didn't personally think that I would be interested in, but by the end of it, it had become the best audio experience I have ever listened to. Hands down, the production was absolutely amazing. Like, it was just edited really well. The sound design was amazing. I know Griffin McElroy, the DM/editor, he composed a lot of original music, and they also had other people compose some original music for it as well. It was just fantastic. And then the McElroys themselves just had such a chemistry, and it was just so funny, and it was emotional, and it had me on the edge of my seat the entire time, and I absolutely loved that. Okay, a little summary. Like I said, Griffin was the dungeon master. He planned all of this out. He wrote the Balance story, and then his two brothers, Travis and Justin, and their father, Clint, were the actual players. And the story revolves around three adventurers: Magnus, Merle, and Taako. Magnus is a human fighter, Merle is a dwarf cleric, and Taako's an elf wizard. And they are all a part of and they are that were created by, and it's really important that they actually but the mystery in this story was amazing. It was just planned out so well, and by the end of it, I cried. I cried like a little baby. Three times I specifically cried. But I'm going to talk about that during the spoiler section of the review, because obviously I'm going to talk about what made me cry, and I can't put that in the spoiler-free part, you know. But no, it was really amazing, and I would recommend this podcast to anyone. So there's 69 main episodes, which I think is about 80 hours. I know that's a really long listen, but it is definitely worth it. And then on top of that, there's also several live shows that they did that are kind of like spin-off stories. And then there's also the Adventure Zone, which is a podcast about the podcast, and every once in a while they do Q&As with the community, and it's a place where the players can actually like ask questions of the DM, and it's all just really insightful. Like, I especially recommend, if you don't want to listen to all of the Adventure Zone zones, I would 100% recommend listening to the last one, because it really talks about like character motivation, and there's some cool theories they talked about. Griffin talks a lot about how he made the story and how he planned things out, and it's just really interesting and insightful to listen to. Magnus, Merle, and Taako are all so unique. Even though they're different races and different classes, which do differentiate them, they have such different personalities, and they have a chemistry between them. And the players are all family, but a big thing with these characters is having their found family. They find family within each other, and I just absolutely love that. And another thing that this story does extremely well is having diversity, which we don't see a lot of in a lot of fantasy settings. There are several members of the LGBTQIA+ community within the story. There are people of different races, not just in terms of it's a fantasy setting, you got humans, elves, dwarves, halflings, all that jazz. Yes, there is that, but there are also characters of different, human races, if that makes sense. And it's really nice to see that within a fantasy setting, and it's something that I think they did really well. Anyway, my whole point is this is a really fantastic podcast, and if you haven't listened to it yet, I know it's really long, but it is worth it. It is so good from beginning to end. It is just an amazing story. So here I'm going to end my spoiler-free review, and I'm moving into the spoiler section. So if you haven't actually listened to it yet, I know it's a long time, but go listen to it and then come back and we can talk about it. I gotta get this out of the way because I finished the podcast a couple days ago, and I deliver food for a third-party delivery app, and so I spend a lot of times driving around, and so it was really nice having this set podcast that I could just listen to, this story that I could listen to for hours on end. But I was out delivering, listening to the last episode, and got to the ending, and I literally had to pull over and stop because I was literally bawling. But they were happy tears. I mean, don't get me wrong, part of me, this has been a really important part of my life I kind of binged it, so not as long as it probably should have been for as long as it is, but it was a really important part of my life. And yes, I was partly crying because I was sad it was over, but the ending was just so good. It was so emotional, and it was a happy cry. So I want to talk about those 3 moments. The first was when they won, and our heroes were all gathered together in front of Neverwinter, and Angus comes up and asks them, did we win? And Magnus tells him yes, and he lifts him up on his shoulder and lets Angus yell to the crowd who were just desperately fighting for their lives that we won. And I cried like a little baby. And then I composed myself. I was okay. And then we were talking, it was a year later, and Griffin and the players were talking about where their characters had been. And with Taako and Merle, he asked, what has your characters been doing for the last year? But with Magnus, he asked, because Magnus was a human, kind of the first one to, the other were, Taako was an elf and Merle was a dwarf, so they had a much longer lifespan. He asked Magnus, how did you die? And the second he said that, I started crying again. I started crying because I knew where it was going. I knew where it was going. And, Magnus was always this Russian first kind of a character. And I think a lot of us, including the Mcelroys, believed that Magnus was going to die in battle. But a large part of his story was getting this found family and realizing that there's more important things in life. And so he dies old in his old age. And while they're actually describing all of this, I was able to compose myself, and I stopped crying, and I was like, okay, I'm good. And then Magnus goes with Kravitz to the cabin, and I knew where it was going, and I kind of started to tear up. And then Julia walked out, and I started crying again like a little baby on the side of the road at work. Finding out what had happened to Julia, really, that hurt. That really hurt. I was so sad for Magnus, but then having Kravitz drop him off and telling him, I can't give you forever, but I'll give you as much time as you need. And then there she is, his wife, the woman he's loved and for so long and has been separated from, and they just start talking and they're together, and I'm starting to tear up right now a little bit. This story was amazing. So, like I said, I've kind of already talked about the ending, but there are just a couple of key moments that I and things I really want to talk about. First is the Bureau of Balance. I absolutely loved how the Bureau of Balance was actually set up, and I'm so sad I didn't get to listen to this live when it was first coming out, because there were all these theories about how the Bureau of Balance was evil and how maybe the Red Robes were good. And that's the kind of stuff I love, and I would have loved to actually be a part of the community around that time when everyone was like theorizing and talking about it. But that's okay. I avoided the Reddit until after I finished it because I didn't want any spoilers, but it was really great actually like going to the Reddit and like actually getting to be a part of the community and knowing like, hey, there's people out there that care as much about this as I do. Bringing up the Bureau of Balance, I did have suspicions that the Bureau of Balance might not have been exactly what they said they were, but I don't think I was ever fully convinced that they were the absolute villains. There was a moment right before the big reveal that I was a little like, maybe, but I never actually viewed the actual Bureau of Balance as a villain. It was more of the director, Lucretia. I thought maybe she was, instead of destroying the Grand Relics, were keeping them for herself. I kind of thought she wanted to make some sort of Infinity Gauntlet style weapon and conquer the world for a minute. And then we got the actual reveal. That was really interesting. I will admit that I did feel like the Stolen Century, which was the arc where we learn all about this, did get a little slow, but at the same time, I binge listened to all of it in like a day, and so I think if I might have spaced it out a little bit, it probably wouldn't have felt so slow, because I was just so desperate to find out what actually happened in the Stolen Century. So like I said, I think if I'd spread it out, it probably wouldn't have felt as slow. But then we find out about Lucretia and what she did, how she erased her friends' memories so they wouldn't have to live with the pain of knowing that they created the Grand Relics and that the Grand Relics were causing so much death and destruction. And we find out what happened to Loop. That blew my mind, and I was so mad at myself. I was so mad at myself that I didn't catch that, because it's foreshadowed. We knew from the Stolen Century that Loop was a lich, and we knew already that Taako's umbrella absorbed dead liches. It was all right there. You guys probably got it. But I had all the information I needed right there, and I didn't see it. And then the reveal came, and it blew my mind. What a cool setup, because Taako's had that umbrella since almost the beginning. And there was this really big thing about how Lucretia made him lose his memory, how she made him forget his sister. And then when he got him back, he still had no idea where she was. And then boom, she was with him the whole time in his staff, in his umbrella, in his wand. That's the word I'm looking for. I absolutely loved it. It was really great getting to hear about all of the Red Robes and where they went after they defeated the Hunger. I think the moment that blew my mind the most from this series was probably the Pedal to the Metal arc, when they're actually in the race. This is an audio-only experience, and they described a Fast and Furious / Mad Max style fantasy race so beautifully. Like, it blew my mind just how well they described it. And like, don't get me wrong, I loved it. I loved the entire podcast up to that, but that just like, I think it really opened my eyes to like what could be done within an audio-only format. Can we just talk about the Angus is a silver dragon theory? Griffin talked about it within the last The Adventure Zone episode for Balance. And he said that it was a fan theory, but it's something he really liked, but he wasn't going to confirm or deny it. And like, I love it. I love that theory. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is the Carey and Killian wedding. It was so cute. Like all the little like sidebars that the characters had, like Magnus having this best friend in Carey and their conversation that they had, and Merle getting ready for the wedding. And I believe Taako was making the food for the wedding. I might have misunderstood that, but like, just all the little different side conversations they had and the flashbacks to where they've been this whole time. And, like, I loved Magnus and Carey's friendship. It was so cool. I loved that they had, like, best friends along with, like, Taako and Angus and Merle and John. I'm sorry, I know I'm talking about the wedding right now, but I guess I totally forgot to talk about John. John was the one who basically created the hunger. I mean, it took his entire plane or planar system to do it, but he was the one who initiated everything, and for a long time he controlled the hunger, and then he didn't. But I really loved the relationship that Merle and John had, because John initiated Merle in his last parlay meeting, which means that Merle could have killed John, and he didn't. He actually tried to help John when the hunger started to drag him down, and, like, that would have never crossed my mind. Like, if I was playing Merle, I would, the second I realized that when I was in parlay and only I had the power to kill him and he couldn't hurt me at all, I probably would have killed him. What Clint did in that moment blew me away. I loved John and Merle's friendship, and I loved Magnus and Carey, and how, like, Magnus made the ring that Carey proposed to Killian with, and they end it with the wedding, and how Carey and Killian just run towards each other, and then it fades out, and Griffin talks about how it was one of the happiest days they ever had, and how they earned this. They created this better world. It was just so amazing, and I could not recommend this more. Okay, I think that's everything. Let's go with some final thoughts. I've covered basically everything, but I just kind of want to summarize. Absolutely amazing. You should definitely listen to it if you haven't. I know it's really long. Like I said, it's like 80 hours, maybe give or take a few, but it is absolutely worth it. Like I've said a couple times, I think, throughout this video, literally the best audio experience I've ever listened to. And I give this an honest 10 out of 10. I love the series. It quickly became one of my favorite fantasy settings, one of my favorite podcasts, one of my favorite just nerdy things in general. Like I said, 10 out of 10. I could not recommend this podcast more. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's actually talk about the Adventure Zone. What did you guys think about it? Have you listened to it? If you haven't, what I've said, what I've talked about today, has it made you actually want to listen to it? And I know there's a ton of stuff I didn't talk about, and I apologize for that. It is a 80-hour podcast. A lot of stuff happened. I just wanted to touch up on some, like, key moments that I felt like were really important to either the story or to me personally. But yes, go listen to it if you haven't. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to join the flock, and I will see you in the next one. Mother Goose out.